Just going back south. So this one's facing north to south. So this is the north end. And this is going up. I got a higher ridge point right here that's thick with cover. This here is a big cut over, select cut, about 5 years old, just thick, nasty. Right there is a mega bed. Just a mega bed right there. And I'm setting this little micro draw right there, a little bubble in the terrain right here that I'm on. These are what I call these bull bridges. They kind of protrude out from the ridge. The ridge is running north to south off of a main Topo Hub that's right there. Basically, this is a big Topo Hub with fingers running out from it. And I'm off on one of those secondary points. And like I said, there is a mega bed right there. It's down to the dirt, got hair all in it. Little micro draw, bull bridge, secondary ridge point coming down. He's probably laying right here, moving up out of that thick stuff in the afternoon and coming down here and getting in this bed before he drops down in this thermal hub on down lower. So this shows exactly where I found that first mega bed in this Topo Hub and its relation to the thick cover. I found it on that secondary ridge point, a little bulb protruding out from it where the ridge kind of turned a little bit. There was a small drainage right in front of it, just a tiny micro drainage that went up. The second mega bed I found in this area was on the same elevation or contour line, basically, and it was about 50 or 60 yards kind of to the northeast of the bed number one. And then both of these were looking back kind of to the northwest into that thermal hub that's kind of to the left side of the screen here. So now these are all of the different little mini rub lines that I found within this Topo Hub. And this is basically the direction. Once I laid all of this out on a map and kind of wrote it out like this, it really made more sense exactly how this buck was probably using these. I basically scouted this out starting from the bottom up. I worked my way out of those drainages and up into these ridge points and just kind of skirted that thick cover. Went all the way around it. Couldn't really push up into the thick cover. It's just way too thick, but you could see trails. There was beds around the edge of it, all around basically the same contour line that went around the edge of that thick cover. And then you could see the rub lines that kind of went around it as well. I didn't really put them on here because there was just too many of them. But the main the travel directional rub lines I've kind of laid out on here. And when you lay those out on there, you get a really better idea of exactly how this buck in particular is using this thermal hub, how he's moving up and down it, and how he's using that Topo Hub to access it. I'm going to move over to another map that'll show the sun exposure. This will give me an idea of exactly how the thermals could be working at different times during the day. And the reason I'm looking at this is to kind of get an idea of how these beds might be used, whether they're used primarily at night, maybe midday, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, maybe transitional bedding. And looking at this map, it kind of makes me think that these beds are probably used in that mid-morning and that mid-afternoon time period, probably on those bed switches, just judging by the thermals that are probably going to be active during this period of time. And I recommend checking this out if you have an area that's like these Topo Hubs and these thermal hubs, and check that sun exposure out. Give you a better idea of what's going on up in those ridges before you really dive in. That way, when you do get up into them and you can check it with that milkweed and just
basically gives you a better idea of exactly how a buck could be using it if you know ahead of time that when those thermals are dropping or when they're rising in different areas where that sun exposure is. Will give you a good idea of exactly what's taking place on those ridges and in those thermal hubs.
In the morning, if he's working his way back up, this might be a first bed in the morning also, because he's laying right on this thick stuff right here. This area right in here is going to get sunlight on that portion first. That's southeast facing slope right there. All this right in here is going to heat up. So right here where this heats up and this is open, and you got that southwest face and you got this north facing slope, you're going to have contrasting thermals right in here. So if he's got a north wind and he comes up in here with those dropping thermals early and gets in this bed in the morning, and he's got a north wind pulling all that scent that's back to his north, is in this rising thermal, you can get it right here. So if there's a doe that happen to be coming around that side or crossing any of those ridges that direction with that northwest wind, he can sit right here and have that cover behind him. Just right up there is a series of scrapes. There's our scrape from last year, but the leaves up here on this sparkleberry have been knocked off and stuff like that, so they're still coming through here and raking their foreheads in it and stuff like that. So you can sit right there in that bed, watch down that ridge, get all this falling thermal from up top here. There's several trails that are coming right around the edge of this steep stuff. So these are the kind of areas. This is just part of a Topo Hub. Right here, the Topo Hub, the main part is up there in that thick stuff. You got all these fingers, and it's almost like a hand coming out. And he's using that. He's working those three fingers are his main area, and he just bounces around each different ridge point. This one here is his favorite. Get that wind that's coming this way, which gives him a good wind coming in, but your scent's all falling. You can sit right on this bluff edge right here. Your thermals are dropping down to the creek below it, or branch below it. That wind carrying that scent back that way. Have a really good setup right here, and he couldn't really smell you.
This is just an example of a possible stand location for this area. If you're sitting there on that red asterisk as your stand location, splitting the difference between the scrape locations, the purple S's, and the green dots being the mega bed locations. You split the difference there, come in access from the east up that drainage and just get right on the cusp of the ridge edge itself, not falling too far to the west, to where your thermals will be pulled down into that thermal hub that the buck is coming up in the morning. So this could be an area that you are able to hunt in both the morning and afternoon. Know from my camera data and the sign on the ground doing the boots on the ground scouting that he's it looks like he's not only coming up that drainage and up those out of that lower thermal hub in the morning, but he's dropping back down into it in the afternoon, using basically this little middle ridge right here as a focal point for all of his activities. So this is just an example that if you have the knowledge that that buck or a buck that you're after is using those lower thermal hubs at night, which is typically the case for a mature buck, or once a buck has learned his craft, they tend to use those lower elevations, especially in that early season. Most all of their damage done down low is going to be at night. That's especially true if you are around areas that have agriculture or crops that are in that lower elevation. Those bucks are going to be dropping down in that, of course, at night and feeding and then working their way back up through the ridge points. Secondary ridge points and things like that, and up those drainages back up into cover during that early morning time period. So that's something to consider if you're in an area that doesn't have crops or agriculture in those lower elevations. A lot of times those bucks are still dropping down in there because that's where all of the thermals, of course, have pooled up. So this is just an example of kind of how I break down the movements within these topographical and thermal hubs and how they work in conjunction. How these deer, these mature bucks, are using these drainages to conceal themselves, conceal their movement, to get up and down in elevation, and then use those secondary ridge points within a topo hub to basically play gatekeeper to the thermal hubs. Now, one of the most important takeaways from all of this is that wind direction doesn't generate buck movement, but wind shifts and thermal shifts do. And you may not can count on a wind shift every day, but just about every day you can count on some sort of thermal switch. So that's the takeaway that I'm really trying to push here is find areas where you know that buck is utilizing that thermal shift. It can be that he's using that thermal shift in the same areas, especially in that early season. So you're looking for those areas that are going to generate that thermal shift that you can take advantage of. And then if you do get wind shifts, adjust accordingly. A lot of times a wind shift in areas like this will just get that buck up to do that micro movement the same way a thermal shift will. But it's those thermal shifts that you can bank on every day that is probably going to have way more effect on mature buck and his movement. And they're a lot more dependable and way more predictable. So you need to look at wind shifts as something that generates large-scale movements across all age groups of bucks. And you need to look at thermal shifts as something that creates predictable, dependable movement with mature bucks in particular. So that's how you need to look at the different wind shifts, the different wind direction, and the different thermal shifts, and how to utilize the thermal shift in a more dependable way to predict and anticipate that mature buck movement.
Just a dynamite spot. You just don't find very many spots like this. You try to identify those, and then you try to work a plan to get in those areas and hunt them. Went another 20 feet, got another mega bed. This one's up on that point. The way this is sitting in here, this is a sunlight bed. More than likely, he's sitting right here warming up. That's what I call these, sunlight beds. He may lay down in that one for a little while. So he's moving from that bed, the bed right down there. He's coming right up to there. There's a little light trail, comes right around through there. He gets in this one. This was sitting here on top of this ridge. This is probably a midday bed where he's sitting up here on top of this ridge. So this may be a case where he's in that little divot right there. You can get right over there, sneak in there really, really early, and he may come into that bed. You just sit there and wait for him to move this midday bed. There's that bed. It's a mega bed too. You can tell he's moved around in it multiple directions. These are the little micro movements that these deer use in these Topo Hubs. How I've learned it is just by dropping a bunch of cameras in here in that September time frame. Early September. I'll have them in here before that first week in September, maybe in late August. Probably come in here another 5-6 weeks from now. This is early July. I'll come in, drop 3 or 4 cameras right in this area right here.
This is that camera transition that I'm really trying to stay ahead of. Running so many trail cameras, I'm trying to go in this summertime and not really worry about where my trail cameras are right now, but pick these areas out that I'm going to transition those trail cameras in. to give me that immediate information that bucks are moving. Once those horns are hard and that transition shifts, I don't want to be chasing that. I want to be trying to be ahead of that and be catching them as that transition happens in the areas that they're going to transition into. So it's staying ahead of that and not trying to catch up to that curve. So if you're running a lot of trail cameras in areas like this and you're trying to use those as scouting, finding that transition, that hard horn transition areas are one of the most important things you can do in that summertime period.
Watch how it changes in that early September time frame. Once the horns get hard, they'll start using these areas, and that'll give you an idea how he's using them. And then I'll come in, check them toward the end of September, a couple weeks before season opens up. And I'll have a better plan for once bow season opens.